You have seen the videos, and maybe you have heard it your whole life at the kitchen table from an aunt or a grandfather who said it like gospel. High cheekbones, that is the native blood. Straight dark hair, a little ridge on the back of your front teeth, a certain set to the eyes, a dark mark at the base of a baby's spine. Signs, they say, of a hidden Native American ancestor, the great-great-grandmother nobody could ever quite name, but everybody was sure was there. And now they promise, DNA confirms it. Millions of Americans, black and white, carry that story in their families like an heirloom passed hand to hand. It is one of the most widespread beliefs in the entire country, and almost all of it is false. Not the family. The family is real, and the love in the story is real. But the signs are not signs at all, and the truth about where those cheekbones and those stories actually come from is stranger, and for a great many families far more painful than the legend that replaced it. Let me be clear about where this is coming from, because I am not guessing, and I am not here to take anything away from anybody or to call anyone a liar. The people who study this question for a living, professional genealogists who trace these lines every single day, the historians who have documented the phenomenon, scholars called Cherokee syndrome, and above all, the geneticists who read the actual DNA have looked at this exhaustively from every angle for decades. Henry Louis Gates Jr., the Harvard scholar who has traced the DNA of hundreds of black Americans on national television and in his books, has written about it directly and repeatedly. The anthropologist Kim Tallbear, herself a citizen of the Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate, has written the definitive scholarly work on DNA and Native American identity. Genealogy firms that specialize in this exact research say the same thing to client after client, and every one of them arrives at the same three conclusions. The physical signs are a myth. The DNA, far more often than not, does not confirm the family story. It takes it apart, and there is no DNA test in existence that can do the one thing these videos are actually promising to do. So let's work through it, honestly, and all the way to the bottom, because the real answer matters more than the flattering one ever could. And because for a great many of you watching right now, the true story of that Cherokee grandmother is a story that has been waiting a long time to finally be known. Start with the signs themselves, because this is where the whole thing collapses. High cheekbones, straight black hair, almond-shaped eyes, shovel-shaped teeth with a little ridge you can feel with your tongue. Olive or reddish skin, a bump at the base of the skull, a dark mark at the base of a baby's spine. Each of these gets passed around online as proof of a secret Native ancestor. And here's the problem, the one that ends the argument before it even starts. Every single one of those traits is found in enormous numbers all over the world, in people with no Native American ancestry whatsoever. High cheekbones are common across Europe, across Asia, across Africa, across the entire human species. They are one of the most ordinary variations in the human face. Straight dark hair is the single most common hair type on the planet, shared by the majority of all humans who have ever lived. Shovel-shaped incisors do show up frequently in East Asian and Native American populations, but they also appear in others, and plenty of Native people do not have them at all. That mark at the base of the spine, sometimes called a Mongolian spot, appears in a huge share of African, Asian, Hispanic, and Southern European babies. It is one of the most common birthmarks on Earth. There is no gene that spells out Native American and then writes itself onto your cheekbones for anyone to read. You simply cannot read a person's continental ancestry off their face, their hair, or their teeth. No forensic scientists, no population geneticists, no honest genealogist would ever attempt it because the science does not allow it. Human traits do not sort neatly by ancestry the way the myth needs them to. They overlap and recur across every population on the planet. And think about what the science approach actually is structurally. It takes ordinary human features shared by literally billions of living people, and reads one specific flattering ancestry into them. That is exactly how a horoscope works. It takes ordinary personality traits that describe almost everyone and lets you feel they describe the special, secret you. The 3 signs video is astrology for your DNA. It feels like evidence. It produces the little shiver of recognition, but it is not evidence, and it never was. It is a story you perform in the bathroom mirror. And the instant you truly absorb that these traits are everywhere, in everyone, the entire foundation of the video collapses, because a sign that points at all of humanity points at no one in particular, and least of all, at a specific grandmother in a specific nation. Now, how big is this myth, really? Because the sheer scale of it tells you something important. On the 2010 U.S. Census, more than 819,000 Americans identified as Cherokee. That is a staggering number. Now set it against reality. The 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes, the Cherokee Nation, the United Kituwa Band, and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, have combined fewer than 400,000 enrolled citizens. In other words, there are more than twice as many Americans claiming to be Cherokee as there are actual enrolled Cherokee people in existence. Read that again. The imaginary Cherokee outnumber the real ones 2 to 1. No other explanation but myth can account for a gap that size. Scholars who study this have a name for it: the Cherokee syndrome or the blood myth. And notice one more telling detail. It is almost always specifically Cherokee, not Creek, not Choctaw, not Seminole, not Lakota, not Navajo, not any of the hundreds of other nations. When the family legend names a tribe, the tribe is nearly always the same one. There are real historical reasons for that. The Cherokee were a large nation in the East. They had early and extensive contact with white settlers. They were widely known to have intermarried with whites and to have adopted European ways. They were labeled one of the so-called civilized tribes, and their heartbreaking story of forced removal along the Trail of Tears was famous across the country. So over time, Cherokee quietly became the default, the respectable, romantic, safely distant ancestor to claim. There is even the persistent legend of the Cherokee princess, the great-great-grandmother who was supposedly Indian royalty. And the Cherokee Nation itself has said this as plainly as it can be said. There was never any such thing as a Cherokee princess. It did not exist. The Cherokee had no princesses. The single most common detail in the entire myth describes something that was never real. So you are looking at a belief so widespread that the make-believe Cherokee outnumber the living ones 2 to 1, anchored by a princess who never existed. That all by itself should tell you that what is being passed down in these families is not sober documented history. It is something else, something that felt true and served a purpose and got repeated until it hardened into fact. And when DNA finally enters the room, that something becomes impossible to keep ignoring. Here is what DNA actually does, and why it usually does the opposite of confirming the story. A modern autosomal DNA test, the kind that estimates your ancestry across all of your lines at once, rather than just one paternal or maternal thread, can within real limits detect Native American ancestry when it is genuinely present in meaningful amounts. It is not perfect. The reference data for Native populations is thinner than for others, partly because many tribes have declined to be genetically cataloged as an act of sovereignty, and very small or very old amounts can slip below the threshold. But when there is a real Native grandmother or great-grandmother in the recent tree, a good test will usually see the signal. So here's what actually happens when people who have carried the Cherokee grandmother story their whole lives finally take that test. The most common result, by an enormous margin, is that the Native American ancestry simply is not there. 0, or a fraction of a percent, where the family had always pictured a grandmother. It comes back European and African, and sometimes a scattering of other things, but not the Cherokee the story promised. This has happened so many times to so many families that it has become almost its own recognizable genre of heartbreak and surprise. The person who was completely certain, whose mother was certain, whose grandmother swore to it, and whose DNA comes back with no detectable Native ancestry at all. 4 generations of absolute conviction undone by a cheek swab. So when a video promises that DNA confirms your high cheekbones are native, understand that it has the entire relationship backwards, precisely backwards. The honest, repeatedly documented pattern is not that DNA confirms the signs. It is that DNA is the thing that finally reveals the cheekbones were never native to begin with, that the grandmother everyone pictured was someone else entirely. The test does not ratify the legend. Far more often, it quietly, gently ends it. And this is where the story turns, and where it stops being a curiosity and starts being something deeper, especially for Black American families, where this exact legend runs incredibly deep. Henry Louis Gates studied this closely, tracing the actual DNA of large numbers of African Americans who carried the family story of a native, usually Cherokee, ancestor. And what he found is one of the most quietly devastating facts in all of American genealogy. For most Black Americans, those high cheekbones and that straight or wavy dark hair do not come from a Native American ancestor at all. They come from European ancestry, the substantial European ancestry that the great majority of African Americans carry, on average around a quarter of the whole genome. And then Gates named the harder truth sitting underneath it, the truth that explains why the myth needed to exist in the first place. That European ancestry, in the overwhelming majority of cases, did not enter Black families through courtship or marriage between equals. It entered through the sexual violence of slavery, through white enslavers, overseers, and their sons who raped the Black women they held as property, women who had no legal power and no earthly ability to refuse. And the Cherokee grandmother story, Gates suggests, was very often a gentler, more bearable explanation for those European features than the truth of how they arrived. Picture the impossible position of a family looking at a light-skinned great-grandmother, at her straight hair and her pale eyes, and needing some way to explain her to the children. It was easier, and it hurt less, to say she was a Cherokee princess than to say she was the daughter of an enslaved woman and the man who owned and assaulted her. The myth was not a lie told to deceive anyone. It was a wound the family dressed in kinder clothing, a story wrapped around a splinter too painful to pull out and look at directly. Generations of children grew up proud of a heritage that had been invented with love and with grief to stand in front of a heritage that was too brutal to name. Sit with that for a moment, because it reframes the whole thing. The sign you were told to be proud of, the cheekbones, the hair, may well be real and may genuinely point back to a hidden ancestor. But that ancestor, for a great many Black families, was not a princess in a village. That ancestor was frequently a white man whose name the family had every reason on earth to bury, and a Black woman who survived what he did to her. The DNA does not confirm the flattering story. It gently, relentlessly uncovers the one the flattering story was built to cover up. That is not a reason to look away. It is a reason to finally look, because those ancestors, the real ones, deserve to be seen and claimed far more than an invented princess ever did. Quick pause, because doing exactly this, taking the comfortable, click-friendly myth carefully apart and handing you the real, documented, sometimes difficult truth that was underneath it the whole time, is the entire reason this channel exists. Not the flattering version that racks up the views by telling you what you hope to hear. The true version, the one that actually holds up when you go and check it, and the one that actually honors the real people it is about instead of replacing them with a fantasy. There's a whole industry online built on selling you a prettier ancestry. This channel is built on the opposite bet, that the real thing is stronger. If that is the work you want, subscribe and stay with me, because the last part of this is the part that matters most of all. Now let me be careful and scrupulously fair, because the signs are a myth is not the same statement as you have no native ancestry, and the space between those two things is where the honest truth actually lives. This is where honesty has to cut in every direction, so let me be precise. First, some families genuinely do have Native American ancestry, and I am absolutely not erasing them. This is especially true for certain Black American families, the descendants of the freedmen who were enslaved by the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole nations and lived among them for generations. The triracial communities of the Southeast, families who lived alongside specific tribes and intermarried in documented, verifiable ways. For those families, the connection can be real, deep, and a matter of record, not myth. And on average, African Americans do carry a small but genuine amount of Native American ancestry, usually a low percentage, often traceable to a single ancestor many generations back, but really there in the genome. So the honest claim is not the blunt, "You are not part Native." The honest claim is narrower and firmer and more useful than that. You cannot possibly know it from your cheekbones or your hair. The amount is very often far smaller than the legend insists, and it frequently sits in a completely different branch of the tree than the story ever placed it. Second, and this is the deepest point of the entire subject, even real Native ancestry sitting in your DNA does not make you Native American, and no test on earth can make you a member of a tribe. This is the heart of Kim Tallbear's work, and it is not a technicality or a piece of red tape. It is the whole truth of the matter. There is no DNA test that proves you are Native American, because being Native American is not, at bottom, a fact about your blood at all. It is a matter of belonging to a specific sovereign nation, a nation with its own history, its own living citizens, its own government, and its own hard-won right to decide who its people are. A small percentage on a consumer ancestry report, even a genuine one, does not hand anyone a tribe, a language, a community that raised them, or a rightful claim on Native identity. And when people take that little number and start calling themselves Cherokee, buying regalia, claiming scholarships or set-asides meant for Native people, they are not recovering a lost heritage. They are, however, unintentionally taking something real from the living nations who actually carry it and defend it. So DNA confirms you are Native American is not merely usually false as a matter of fact. It is a category error all the way down. An answer to a question DNA is not built to answer and never will be. Third, none of this is meant to shame anyone who ever believed the family story. Almost everyone did. Gates himself grew up with it, proud of it, the way his whole extended family was. It was passed down with love, and very often it was first told in order to survive something unbearable. The goal here is not to embarrass you out of a cherished myth. The goal is to offer you something sturdier and truer to stand on than the myth ever was. So let's bring it home, because there is something better, and it is the whole reason to let the legend go. The 3 Signs video, and every video like it, is selling you a mirror. It tells you to look at your own face and see a flattering story that asks nothing of you and teaches you nothing true. But your actual ancestry, the real one, waiting in the records and in the honest reading of your DNA, is so much more than a set of cheekbones. For a great many of you, the Cherokee grandmother was pointing at something real all along. Not a princess, but a genuine ancestor whose true story got buried. Sometimes because it was European ancestry born of violence. Sometimes because it was a real but different Native connection. Sometimes because it was the tangled, remarkable history of a free family of color. Every one of those true stories is more worth having than the myth, because every one of them is actually yours. So here's what to do instead of counting signs in the mirror. If you genuinely want to know, then test with a real autosomal DNA test that reads all of your lines at once, not a horoscope of your own face. Then read the result honestly, all of it, including the parts that sting, including when it tells you the Native ancestry is not there at all, or is far smaller and further back than you were raised to believe. And then do the actual work, the work the myth was designed to let you skip. The census records, the wills, the freedmen's files, the family names, the flesh and blood cousins your DNA connects you to. That is how you find the real ancestor the story was always pointing at, whoever they truly turn out to be. The myth hands you a princess who never existed and then tells you to stop looking because the search is already over. The truth hands you your actual family and asks you to go and meet them. And your actual family is extraordinary, every version of it. It might be the white ancestor whose name was buried for a reason, and the black woman who survived him and carried the line forward anyway. It might be a free family of color who slipped through the cracks of a merciless system and kept themselves free. It might be, in some families, a genuine native ancestor in a real nation whose history you can actually learn and whose living people you can honor properly instead of playing dress up with. Every one of those true stories is worth 100 imaginary princesses because every one of them actually happened and every one of them is actually yours. Those cheekbones were never a sign of anything, but your history, the real, documented, hard-won history under the legend, is as real as your own face in the mirror. And unlike the legend, it can bear the full weight of your looking. It does not need a myth to make it matter. It only needs you to set the mirror down and pick up the record. Next time, we follow the DNA where it actually leads for the great majority of Black America, not to a Cherokee princess who never existed, but across the ocean, to West and West Central Africa, to the Rice Coast, and the great kingdom of the Congo, the true and documented homeland that the ancestry keeps pointing back toward again and again. That is a heritage no myth could ever improve on, for one simple reason: it is real, it is vast, and it is yours. There are no imaginary princesses there. There are kings and scholars and cities and a civilization the history books left out. Subscribe, and we'll finally follow it all the way home together.